Now, returning to this, I get this big pear note. So I
Yeah.
really love big pear note. I often talk about pear drops, a hard candy, the bottled
Sure.
sweets.
Okay.
Sometimes, if there's too much pear drop, you sometimes get a bit of kind of acetone going on. But before that stage, you can get this nice sweetness, this kind of candied sweetness, and then that kind of pear flavoring going on.
Yeah, and this is another first fill X bourbon, and the bourbon is there, but again, it's not taking over, which is nice too because I mean, Altmore is it's supposed to be I think Holly talks about in the video we did with her where Altmore was very in demand by blenders because it can kind of get along, it doesn't rub anybody the wrong way, it's just kind of gets along with everybody. So it seems like something that could get dominated easily, but it's really not
Yes,
here.
yes,
And I'm especially looking forward to talking about this when we get to the 30-year-old version.
right. But then imagine, as you rightly say, that this was in demand by blenders. Imagine putting 30% of this Altmore on top of 70% of that Invergordon, right?
Mm,
Imagine making a little home blend in your glass. And right, and
I'm
imagine what
looking
we
at them
talked about.
now.
This is how I get you to drink faster and
Yeah.
buy more. Every day I have one of these 70% Invergordons with this 30% Altmore. It's amazing. I
Weird.
love my life. But imagine, those vanilla ice cream notes that
Mm,
we talk about the Invergordon bringing to the table, then with these kind of pear and fruity fresh notes that the Altmore's bringing to the table. Imagine bringing those together.
oh
Now you're
man.
starting to do what John Glazer's doing with Compass Box,
Mm,
right? And you can see why John puts out bright expressions,
mm.
right? You don't need a lot of components to pull out a lot of nice flavors and bright flavors. So yeah, you can tell that I'm really terrible at selling my stuff because now we're talking about Holly, who sells the Bacardi portfolio, and we're
Right.
talking about John Glazer, who sells Compass Box, and
But
Jason's here from Single Cast Nation. I
it's
am
like
a
you said,
whiskey geek. I just want to talk about whiskey.
it's all in context, and that again, that's part of why we trust you, I think,
Right?
because you're not just selling us the snake oil, you're talking about everybody else's snake oil too.
Right. I love it all.
Yeah. Oh
Uh,
man. But
but
this,
no,
yeah,
but
go.
but even with the Invergordon, where we're talking about 40 million liters per annum,
Mm,
with some expansion and with increased rotations, Altmore are now up to 3 million
mm.
liters per annum. So if you
Oh,
think of
interesting.
3 million liters of single malt coming out, they've now added their own lineup,
Mm.
which is not a thing. Even 2012, I think there was one official bottling. Here we are just
We're
eight
just
years
starting.
later, and I want to say there's maybe four. Travel retail's a part of that, so the number's always fluid.
Right.
But I want to say there might even be 4 or 5 official Altmores released by the distillery now,
Yeah.
which is brilliant because now you can go from the independent bottler to the OB. You can go from the OB to the independent bottler. You can listen to Holly talk about the spirit. You can get a sense of what Altmore is now, and that's brilliant. That's to the fore. That's
Yeah.
where we should be with Scotland's distilleries.
No, that's where it gets really fun.
Yeah.
Man. The other thing I wanted to mention too, which is definitely something I found with a lot of these and really a lot of independent bottles or just higher proof stuff in general, is that there can be sometimes a pretty big difference, especially in terms of how much heat you're getting
Mhm.
from the very first time you open the bottle to even giving it a little bit of oxygen and giving it some time. And
Exactly.
I've found that with some of these. I mean, the Altmore is at 60.7%,
Wow.
which is not shy.
But
That's
would you guess that just sticking your
no,
nose in it?
especially not now. And I've only had this open for 3 days, something like that,
Yeah.
maybe, and it's already like really starting to like tame down on the alcohol. All the fruits are popping more.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
add water, that kind of adds a whole other dimension then too. So it's really
Yeah.
like you have to go back to a whiskey a couple times, like you were saying, even just in context of what else you're drinking, in the lifespan of that bottle. It can really, really change. And I think the good ones tend to change more.
Yeah, and I'm glad you bring up water because it's something that we always leave in the lap of the consumer.
Mm,
Is we never make statements of, oh, we think you should add a couple of drops to this or add a couple and that will really open up to you. We just we put it in the bottle. We only bottle what we think can be consumed at that strength,
Mm.
you know. And so when the consumer gets it, tackle it at that strength. Your palate is your palate. See where a little bit of water goes. For me, I almost never add water.
Yeah.
Almost never.
Huh.
You know, even as I talk about drinking, you know, two different whiskeys so I could do point counterpoint, I still almost never bring water into that equation,
Mm.
only because I get sad when you get to that point you've added too much. Even if you work your way down, just careful drops, careful drops, careful drops, you get to a point where you go, oh, and that's too much.
And
It's
it's
kind of
over the
fallen
hill.
apart at this. Whereas I like knowing what it was doing in the cask. I like, you know, and again, there's no right or wrong to this.
Sure.
I just like that idea of this is what it was sitting at.
Yeah.
Also interesting to have 8 years and still have it at 60% alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
Makes me wonder what it went into cask at.
That's,
You know,
a good point.
63.5 being the standard, but you see 65, you see 68s and 69s. If you think, I talk about this in all my tastings, if you think 8 years ago, you were about 6 years into the boom at that point, you had more whiskey sitting in wood than they had wood. And so you started having producers upping their entry strength because then you could get more of the alcohol into the same volume of vessel.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's exactly what Glenfarclas did after the Second World War. That's why you were able to get some Glenfarclas 40-year-old 105s because they'd filled at such a high strength.
That it held up over those years, yeah. And anyone
exactly.
if you don't know, usually in Scotland the alcohol will go down, and in the States it tends to go up depending on humidity and a couple other things. But yeah, it's tough to find really old whiskey at pretty high strength.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. And so we're always excited when we find that. And again, it's another one actually with the Bacardi portfolio is you'll often find Craigellachie coming out at higher than normal fill strength. Do you have our Craigellachie behind you?
Yeah, so the Craigellachie 10, which we still have a
Yep.
bunch of too.
Awesome.
67.3.
Right? So
That's
that
serious.
it's impossible. That could not have gone into cask at 63.5. But can you remind us the distillation year on that?
This one was May 2008.
So you're 2 years into the boom. You're 2 years into the recognized boom when producers were just moving to 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and having to put alcohol into cask. And so filling at higher strengths.
Nice. Yeah, that's one. So piece of history.
Right.
At only 8 years old. Yeah.
Right. It all is.